This evening, we're going to focus on a very important topic, securing your driver's license. In that regard, the topics tonight will include securing a recognizable photo ID, taking driving and written tests where necessary, taking care in advance of all past driving violations and fines, because if you don't, that's going to be an impediment to getting your license when you appear for your license. And finally, getting a hearing at a Secretary of State office if necessary to reduce those fines. We hope you enjoyed this evening's class.
Okay, so moving next to the Secretary of State driver's license issue, many states, including Illinois, so this was an issue for me, very important to have a ID that's recognizable by legal authorities. For instance, if you're going into a bank, if you are going into a currency exchange, many different venues, your prison ID is not going to suffice. So you will need to have that when you initially go to the Secretary of State to secure your license. In my case, because it had been so many years, I had to take both the driving and the written test. You might want to go in advance to the local Secretary of State and secure the materials to study for the written test, which I did. And getting your driver's license, depending on your situation, could be a very important initial first step, because it's a practical matter for many of us. It'll be very difficult to move around without a vehicle. Not to mention when we leave the halfway house and go to whatever more permanent residence we'll have, it would be very important for most of us to have a car or some type of vehicle. So one of the things to be mindful of, and it shouldn't be a surprise to many, is that past driving violations, including parking violations, and I can tell you I was one. I had some very old parking tickets that I had to take care of before I would be receiving my license. So if this is something of an issue now, I would look to take care of that right away, because that could be an impediment to moving ahead with the license. Other than that, this is a personal issue for many of us. You know, public transportation might suffice for some time. But if you think that it's very important for you to have a car, you want to get your ducks in a row so that when you do go to the Secretary of State, you're prepared to move ahead with the written and or driving test in a positive and productive way. Anything else to add on that issue, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of hits home hard. I mean, I live in Chicago, which they call colloquially like the city that you don't need a car. And then I learned really quick, like, but you want one. You know, you don't want to be riding that red line. So I hadn't had my driver's license since I was 19 years old. And, you know, I did an extended period of time. A little background, I should actually tell you a little bit about myself, like David. I did about 5 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, and it was for property crimes. While I was in there, you know, I met Rabbi Scheinman. I earned my paralegal certificates. I'm actually working for Carpels now, which is a legal aid agency in Chicago. I worked for Cabrini Green Legal Aid and for a private attorney before that, but everything's been working out fine. You know, I've been out for about 5.5 years now, so things are going well. But one of the things that I had resolved myself to, even when I was making my plans before release, we're like, nah, you know what? You're not going to be able to have a driver's license. So just get used to, you know, trying to find out how to navigate the public transportation systems. And nothing could have been further from the truth. I ended up finding out that the things that were holding me from my driver's license were, you know, fines or judgments. And depending on your state, what I actually learned was you can go to your Secretary of State's office, you can meet with a hearing officer, and they can grant you your driver's license back, regardless of whether you pay the judgments or fines off, if it's past a certain amount of time. I hadn't had my driver's license since I was 19 years old and just said, well, I'm never going to have it because the amount of money that I had to pay was so much. No, I just had to go in there, explain the situation and say, you know, I haven't had the money to pay it. I would like to get my driver's license back. They make a judgment, and at least in Illinois, they granted it. So I could not encourage you more to at least call up your Secretary of State's office and find out what the procedure is for meeting with a hearing officer to find out what do I have to do to get my driver's license back. This is presuming you don't have it and you need to get it back. One of the biggest things that returning citizens have going for them that they don't realize that they have going for them is that they've had that many years off the road. You literally have, however long you serve, you have that much time without a parking ticket, without a speeding ticket, without any kind of time being pulled over or anything like that. That looks really good to a hearing officer. So it's definitely something to explore. You know, and it's something that's achievable, even if you think, you know, it's not worth it. Totally is. One disclaimer, they're always going to want a little bit of money. So it's probably going to be like, you know, $500 to reinstate your driving privileges. It's, you know, it's the government. They want their money. So, but check it out. You got nothing to lose from checking it out.
A driver's license is obviously critical for your employment. It is possible to reinstate your license notwithstanding that you had previous fines. And those that you'll have to deal with those fines in the state or county offices are typically willing to settle with you if you can do so on a reasonable basis. Be vigilant, stay positive, and you will secure your license. We hope you enjoyed this evening's class. This evening we'll be focusing on evidencing your efforts to find work and stability during probation. Topics for tonight will include outreach agencies and finding work, temporary jobs to build momentum, volunteer work, the importance of securing letters of recommendation, taking classes where you can, putting together an effective resume and cover letter. We hope you enjoy this evening's class.
Speaking for myself, at the halfway house I was at for 6 months, they had an office with computers and postings on a regular basis and a lot of detail actually on job availability. Most of the jobs that were posted were strictly labor intense type positions, as you might imagine. But the agencies are at times worthwhile to reach out to and contact to speak to, because many of these outreach agencies, particularly in the big cities, focus on those who are recently released from prison. Now, one of the things I found though was the majority of the jobs, as I just mentioned, are very labor intense. So for guys like me, 60 years old, it's a challenge, to be getting involved in many of these jobs at that point, physically speaking, challenging type positions. So that's something you have to kind of determine, is that something you want to become involved in? But those jobs are there. And one of the things for those of you who in prison, and at least in the federal prison, welding and many of these labor type of positions and skills were taught, those are the type of jobs that are paying pretty good money actually today and are available on a regular basis, welding being a major one. I knew I was in the halfway house with a couple of electricians that did very well right out of the gate, as an example. They had been previously licensed, very skilled guys. So the construction business, roofing, things of that nature. I mean, there are opportunities. I found that the most difficult situation is a guy like me who had a white collar crime in a business type situation, or had a professional license and I can no longer be licensed. Those are sometimes the most challenging situations for people, because those jobs are just not there for a guy like me, and you almost have to start your own business, which at least in the halfway houses in Illinois are not initially allowed to be pursued. You have to get a W-2 earning income right out of the gate, and so it's a challenge, there's no question about it. If you happen to know someone, and I happen to be very fortunate, I had a friend who had a daughter who had a business not far from the halfway house, so at least I was able to do something out of the gate to get started. And thankfully it was right near where my daughter was employed, so I was able to see her for lunch occasionally. It wasn't something long term, but at least again, I think the important thing mentally for all of us is to get out of that halfway house, and as part of the reintegration process, get something going that you can build momentum with as you move along. So that would be my recommendation. Don't be so caught up necessarily in the first job being your last. Stay positive, get something, and from there you can continue to look and move on. So I am encouraged by what I saw in terms of the number of potential jobs available and people actually getting hired for these positions when I was in the halfway house, with the caveat again that they're almost all limited to labor intensive type of positions. Nick, your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I was replying to a couple of these things on the chat here, but I would just kind of springboard off of that and say that presentation is almost everything when it comes to successfully navigating probation and parole. What you want to do is contact your probation or parole officer more than they even require. When you do show up to see them, make sure that you have in your hand, I'm talking about documentation on paper. Hey, I don't care if it's handwritten on a piece of paper. On this date, I went to this community college and I talked to a counselor who, went over different programs with me. That's great. I went online here and put my resume out to try to find a job. Put all this on your like a journal, like even a handwritten journal. And every time you meet with your parole officer, give it to them and say, bring 2 copies. Don't even make them make a copy. Bring 2 copies and say, here's for my file. And then I got one right here so we can go over it. And, that this way we can at least discuss what I'm actually doing to try to, reach some stability. I would say one thing about these local outreach agencies. You're going to want to find one that, has somebody that you can work with that's willing to write you letters of recommendation. I moved to the south side of Chicago, and there was a baker's dozen different places where I could, volunteer and give them some help or something like that. They didn't necessarily, it was a revolving door. They didn't necessarily have somebody there that knew me. So after trying out a couple different places, I found one that was pretty stable. I found a person who said, yes, I'll vouch for you. It helped out enormously. So kind of pick and choose, but volunteering looks really, really good to a probation or parole officer, especially if they're going to consider, am I going to let you off early? I mean, on the one hand, they have, look, I'll put it this way, everybody sets the bar super low. They have 95 clients, right? And 90 of them aren't doing anything. They might be on an ankle monitor, they're watching TV at night, and during the day, they're really not doing anything. All you got to do is be better than those 90. You know what I'm saying? Like, show them something where it's like, hey, I'm a little different here. And these are the things to do. It's even if you don't intend on doing it, even if you already have a PhD, I don't care. Like, go find out what it takes to take a night class. Find out where you can volunteer and have somebody to write you a letter. Go to the Secretary of State's office. Write all this stuff down. Be prepared. Presentation is 100% of parole. It's 100%. There is nothing. No, I'd say it's 95%. The other 5% is don't get in trouble again while you're on parole.
I would like to add this too, if I could, and that is that in addition to a resume that we'll all be preparing when we leave prison, and let's face it, those resumes are going to have large gaps oftentimes and are going to be challenging from a number of perspectives. That's why it is so important actually to do a very well thought through cover letter and to have, as Nick alluded to, letters of recommendation to the extent that you can have them, assisting you with that. So that's something to also think about. But I can tell you that, at least from my perspective, the resume in this particular instance is almost secondary. The most important thing and the first thing that they're going to focus on, I believe, is reading the, particularly if it's presented this way, is a cover letter that's going to be on top of the resume. And I would even suggest, if you have letters of recommendation, both from those who might have been case managers or counselors who are supportive of you while you've been in prison, as well as others who are either family or friends or other types of contacts once you're out of prison who can speak credibly and notably on your progress. To me, that is all the more important, given the fact that the resume is going to have these gaps and going to have the challenges that we all know exist. So that's something I think to really think about.
In summary, be ready to present and document and journal all of your efforts to your parole and probation officers. Go to outreach agencies to find work, even if for temporary jobs, until you can find something more acceptable. Volunteer in places where you can get letters of recommendation. And finally, compose cover letters and resumes that you're proud of that outline your progress on a continuing basis. We hope you enjoyed this evening's class.